When the Great Depression hit in 1929, many Americans began to lose all hope for the future. Most of them lived in economic ruin, unable to provide for their families. Therefore, children in these families didn't have many forms of entertainment, that is, until the 1930s, when the golden age of comics began. Superheroes quickly became role models for the depressed and hopeless, but they seemed more like gods than actual relatable characters. This all changed when the man by the name of Stan Lee joined the industry in the 1940s and revolutionized the comics arena, creating the characters of today's Marvel Universe. From his work at Marvel Comics to his cameos in Marvel movies, he has influenced pop culture by creating characters that empower kids, whether they were born in the 1940s or in the 2000s. Stanley Martin Lieber was born December 28, 1922 in Manhattan. He lived with his immigrant parents and his younger brother, Larry Lieber. His father was a dress cutter, his mother was a housewife, and Larry would grow up to co-create at Marvel Comics with Lee. His father could find little work during and after the Great Depression, so his family had to live with financial difficulties in a one-bedroom apartment. Lee attended DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. In his youth, Lee enjoyed writing and dreamed of one day writing the great American novel. He worked many part-time jobs in an attempt to gain experience and help with the family income, such as writing obituaries for a news service and press releases for the National Tuberculosis Center, ushering at the Rivoli Theater on Broadway, and selling subscriptions to the New York Herald Tribune newspaper. After winning a high school essay competition sponsored by said newspaper 3 times at age 15, Lee started to seriously consider pursuing writing. He graduated from high school early at age 16 in 1939. In that same year, Lee became an assistant at the new Timely Comics division of Pulp magazine and comic book publisher Martin Goodman's company. Goodman was married to Lee's cousin, and how Lee got the job remains disputed, but what Lee did during this time at Marvel is unquestionably revolutionary. Timely, by the 1960s, would evolve into Marvel Comics. He was first hired as an office boy where he fetched the writers and artists coffee and refilled their inkwells. Young Stanley Lieber made his comic book debut with the text filler Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge in the Captain America Comics number 3 in 1941. This is where he first used the pseudonym Stan Lee, a play of his first name Stanley, which years later he would adopt as his legal name. Lee later explained that because of the low social status of comic books, he didn't want his current job to ruin his reputation when he someday wrote the great American novel. Lee's first superhero co-creation was The Destroyer in Mystic Comics number 6, August 1941. In this year, Lee, just under 19 years old, was promoted to the temporary editor. However, he remained the comic book division's editor-in-chief as well as the art director until 1972, when he would succeed Goodman as publisher. His skills and creativity, especially during the 60s, brought about new types of characters that left a mark on generations. When the U.S. entered World War II, like many other young men, Lee joined the Army. He entered in early 1942 and served within the U.S. as a member of the Signal Corps, repairing telegraph poles and other communications equipment. He was later transferred to the Training Film Division, where he worked writing manuals, training with films, slogans, and occasionally cartooning. He even kept up with his work writing comics at home. He returned home in 1945, where he later got married in 1947 to Joan Bucock. The couple welcomed a baby girl in 1950, Joan Celia Lee, and another in 1953, Jan Lee, who unfortunately died 3 days later. When Lee returned from the war, comic book sales weren't doing so well. The industry was in need of new characters and fresh ideas. In the late 1950s, DC Comics revived the superhero archetype and experienced significant success with its superhero team, the Justice League of America. In response, Lee's publisher assigned him to come up with a new superhero team. Lee then created the Fantastic Four in 1961, illustrated by Jack Kirby, giving his superheroes a flawed humanity, which was a change from the ideal archetypes that were typically written for preteens. For the first time ever, comics had complex characters who could have bad tempers, be depressed, be vain, etc. They bickered amongst themselves, worried about paying their bills and impressing their crushes, got bored, or were even sometimes physically ill. Lee made the possibilities endless for superhero characteristics. He went against his publisher's wishes many times, such as when he created the most successful Marvel character in 1962, Spider-Man, who was the first teenage hero. When Lee was publisher, in an attempt to make the characters even more relatable, Lee broke the Marvel code by publishing a Spider-Man comic that featured a drug addict as Peter Parker's best friend. He shined a light on current issues that were typically avoided at the time and created many different backgrounds for his many different characters so that Marvel readers could relate to at least one. Lee, with the help of Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and many others, created the Hulk, Thor, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, X-Men, Daredevil, Black Panther, and so many more characters, all of whom lived in a thoroughly shared universe. Lee and Kirby gathered several of their newly created characters together into a team titled The Avengers and would revive characters from the 1940s such as Captain America. Although at times there was dispute between the co-creators about who should actually be credited for some of these heroes, Stan Lee is remembered as the godfather of comics for his large contribution to 100 plus Marvel characters and comics in a small time frame of about 10 years. Lee never retired, but after he became publisher, he didn't have any time to actually write. Instead, he gave input to the current writers and artists and tried to move Marvel Comics onto new mediums such as TV and movies. Most of his first attempts for live action were flops, but Marvel's Incredible Hulk was successful for 5 seasons from 1978 to 1982, and the animated shows were popular as well. Starting in the early 2000s is when the Marvel Cinematic Universe really took off, most notably 2008's Iron Man. Through these new mediums, Lee found a way to influence yet another generation. He even included himself in cameos for each movie that starred a character that he helped bring to life. Now fans recognize him as the lovable old grandpa of the MCU. Stan Lee has influenced and inspired several generations with his revolutionary ideas about what a hero should be, and has helped many Americans who may have felt powerless begin to realize how strong they can be, by creating characters such as the Black Panther, the first African-American superhero, and Spider-Man, the first teenage superhero. He addressed current issues in his comics that most would have avoided and helped more readers relate to the Marvel characters. He won many awards for his contributions to pop culture and his remarkable achievements as a young writer, such as the Life Career Award in 2002. By adding satirical and real-world elements, he modernized the hero and made Marvel comics, movies, and TV shows enjoyable for all ages. For all these reasons and more, I nominate Stan Lee for the APUSH Wall of Fame, and I hope he gets your vote.